Southern Fried True Crime covers cases that are not suitable for young listeners, and there may also be some explicit language used. Listener discretion is advised. For those who missed the last episode, here's a quick recap. On September 11th, 1991, in the small town of Jasper, Alabama, a couple named Earl and Carrie Lawson were sleeping peacefully until they were awoken by a phone call. It was in the darkest hours of the night, before dawn breaks. And those kind of calls are never good. Earl's father had recently been ill, so when the woman on the phone claimed to be a nurse from the local hospital, they believed her. She said his dad, Earl Lawson Sr., might not even make it through the night, and they needed to rush to Walker Medical Hospital right away. The couple threw on some clothes and rushed out the door, jumping in their Ford Explorer in the carport. Suddenly, a masked man appeared with a gun. Earl Lawson realized immediately that the phone call from the nurse had been a ruse. The assailant made Carrie bind Earl with duct tape and then forced her back into the Explorer. And then he raced off into the night, abducting 25-year-old Carrie Lawson. Earl managed to break free from the duct tape, but his keys were still in the Explorer, so he kicked in his back door and called his dad and 911. Then he called Carrie's parents. He later said it was one of the hardest things he ever had to do in his life. Their families were shocked to discover this was a kidnapping for ransom. It seemed like something you only saw in movies, but it was very real, and they were terrified for Carrie. In the last episode, I told you all about the parade of mistakes the FBI made in this case. Now we're getting into the repercussions of those mistakes and even more bad decisions, as Carrie Lawson's life hung in the balance. Welcome to episode 219, The Kidnapping of Carrie Lawson, Part 2. In the last episode, we learned about the first failed ransom drop, the agonizing phone calls with Carrie, the myriad mistakes made by the FBI, and finally, a successful ransom drop. Only after he got the money, Carrie's family and law enforcement never heard from the kidnapper again. On September 28th, she had been missing for 17 days, and authorities released audio tapes of the calls with the kidnapper to the public. They played on radio stations and TV news repeatedly in the hopes that someone would recognize the kidnapper's voice. More than 100 people called in with tips. According to an FBI expert, the man had not just a North Alabama accent, but a Jasper accent, and he turned out to be right. A caller recognized the voice of a man named Jerry Bland on the radio station and called the tip line. He was certain it was Jerry Bland's voice. Jerry Bland was born right there in Jasper in December 1941 to parents Albert and Lorraine Bland. Jerry also attended Walker High School, now known as Jasper High School, the same school Earl Lawson Jr. had graduated from. But Jerry would have graduated around the spring of 1959, 24 years before Earl, so they had never crossed paths. Records weren't clear, so we weren't entirely sure Jerry Bland got his diploma, but we do know he enlisted in the Army after high school. He completed basic training at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. After his military service, Jerry began working as a strip mine operator in the late 1960s, then working for B&D Industrial Mining Services through the 70s and 80s. In 1987, Jerry helped found 2 mining companies. One was called BKW Enterprises. It operated out of Bessemer, Alabama. Jerry started the company with 3 partners, including his brother. But Jerry was bought out 2 years later in 1989, which seems to mark the beginning of his downward spiral. Selling out was a terrible decision. Jerry was married to a woman named Sheila. They had 2 daughters together. At the time of Carrie's kidnapping, they lived in a North Jasper home. Around 1990, after Jerry sold his company, he and Sheila moved from a very nice, expensive home in the same Heritage Hills subdivision where Carrie and Earl had built their home to a cheaper home in Jasper. They were experiencing financial struggles. Jerry had made some poor business decisions, but he also had an expensive substance abuse problem. His drug of choice was cocaine. So by the time 1991 rolled around, Jerry really needed money, badly. After investigating Jerry, finally, the pieces were starting to come together for the FBI. Multiple people said Jerry's voice matched the kidnapper's voice in the recordings. But still, a question remained. Who was the woman who had helped Jerry? Who had pretended to be a nurse when calling Earl and Carrie that night? The FBI was already looking at Jerry's female associates when a woman named Karen was identified on a recording that the police didn't make. I'll get to that in just a bit. The woman on the recording was Karen Lancaster McPherson, Jerry's close friend and cousin by marriage. Karen Lancaster was born in the fall of 1961. She came from a blue-collar military family. Members of Karen's family described themselves as dysfunctional and the working poor. During her childhood, Karen's father was a Special Forces serviceman. He was deployed to Vietnam twice, and he was also an alcoholic. Karen's mother, Ida Cleveland, said Karen's father would often talk down to her and her children. Ida explained to AL.com he told them they would never be as good as he was. Karen was the fourth of 5 children. Her family told newspapers that Karen and most of her siblings had developed substance abuse issues. As an adult, Karen was a truck driver for Deaton Trucking. She married young and had 1 daughter before her divorce. In 1988, 27-year-old Karen married a 36-year-old truck driver named Ricky Lynn McPherson. Ricky had also been married before, but he had no children. He, Karen, and her teenage daughter lived in a house in Coleman, Alabama. Karen was on disability from a workers' compensation claim. She fell and hit the railing on a truck. In the process, Karen injured her knees and legs. Due to her on-the-job injury, she became partially disabled and lost 45% of her earning ability. As a result, Deaton had to pay her benefits into the mid-90s. By 1991, Karen was a housewife, and as I alluded to earlier, she had become close with her cousin by marriage, Jerry Bland. According to Karen's family, Jerry had bypass surgery and needed help. Karen chipped in, and apparently, the two became pretty close friends. Karen's family would later claim that Jerry preyed on Karen. Her mother and eldest brother told reporters that Karen was easily manipulated. They also said Karen had a bad habit of overlooking men's flaws. So Jerry, who was said to be charismatic and charming, took advantage of that. There are even rumors that Jerry threatened to harm Karen and her family if she didn't help him with this abduction plot. But frankly, there's no hard evidence to show that's true. Just the claims of Karen's family members trying to mitigate complicity in Carrie's kidnapping. Karen's oldest brother, Frank, told AL.com that he believed Jerry was trying to approach him about the ransom scheme first. Weeks before Carrie was taken, Jerry allegedly invited Frank and his wife to a pool party. Frank thought that was odd. Jerry hardly ever invited him over. He had a business opportunity he wanted to run by Frank, but apparently they didn't get to it at the party. Frank, who was a U.S. Marine, soon took an overseas assignment. He was in Singapore at the time of the kidnapping. Ultimately, it's unclear how Jerry convinced Karen to cooperate with his plan to kidnap Carrie Lawson, but it is widely accepted that Jerry was the mastermind behind the kidnapping. Though, as you'll hear in a minute, Karen is not without blame. Let's circle back to the timeline of the investigation. On Saturday, September 28th, Carrie had been missing for over 2 weeks. The kidnapper/Jerry's phone calls had been released, and the FBI had tentatively identified him. Karen would soon be identified too. That same Saturday, the FBI got a warrant and searched Jerry's home and truck. Right away, they discovered cash in his truck. It was 84 $100 bills. Using serial numbers, the FBI verified that this was, in fact, part of the ransom money. They also found several guns in the house and a small amount of marijuana. But the agents did not arrest Jerry. Instead, the FBI secretly surveilled Jerry's house over the weekend. They saw that Jerry's wife and 2 daughters were in the home. The mother and daughters were sleeping on a mattress in the living room, but at some point they left, and Jerry was all alone. Then, that Sunday, September 29th, a child found a cassette tape near an apartment complex swimming pool in Jasper. It was turned in to the authorities as abandoned property. According to the Birmingham Post-Herald, Jerry's wife Sheila made the tape. Sheila thought Jerry was cheating on her, and she was trying to catch him in the act. Instead, Sheila had inadvertently recorded Jerry and Karen McPherson planning to kidnap and kill someone for money. Not Carrie Lawson, though. Initially, the plan was to abduct a local wealthy coal executive named Ellis Taylor. The Daily Mountain reported that Karen and Jerry had also been considering targeting former Alabama First Lady Lisa Taylor Wallace. For whatever reason, Jerry and Karen pivoted to Carrie Lawson instead. Carrie's family assumed Jerry knew of Earl Lawson Sr.'s successful auto parts shop. Karen McPherson's family said that Jerry told her he chose Carrie because he knew Earl Lawson's daddy was rich. I don't think it's a big mystery. Jerry Bland was aware of the prominent Jasper families and seemed to have done his research. But I reckon if he had known more about Carrie's background and that her folks were millionaires, he might have asked for a bigger ransom. Regardless, law enforcement knew Jerry was involved. They knew Karen was involved. They searched Jerry's home and were watching it closely. Then on Monday, September 30th, they searched Karen's home. There, agents found thousands of dollars in cash, with the serial numbers corresponding to the ransom money, just like they had found in Jerry's truck. Shortly after, Karen verified to the authorities that she had indeed helped Jerry kidnap Carrie Lawson. She told investigators that her job was to act as the nurse who lured Carrie and Earl out of the house. She had also dropped Jerry off at the Lawson home. Afterward, she was in charge of supervising Carrie for several hours while Jerry organized the ransom exchange. But, much to the FBI's dismay, Karen said she didn't know where Carrie was now. Karen claimed that the last time she saw Carrie was 2 days after the kidnapping, September 13th. Now, it was the last day of September, and while Karen said Carrie was alive the last time she saw her, that had been weeks ago. Anything could have happened since then. According to Karen, Jerry told her that Carrie had escaped when he left her alone for a while. But the authorities were pretty sure that was a lie. Still, investigators were feeling optimistic. District Attorney Charles Baker told the Birmingham Post-Herald that on Monday night, he thought they had Jerry nailed to the wall. At this point, Jerry knew he was in trouble. Among many other things, it doesn't sound like the FBI was subtle about staking out his house. As a result, Jerry's family had helped him find a lawyer, so DA Baker and Jerry's lawyer were negotiating terms. The FBI wanted to dangle a carrot in front of Jerry so that he would tell them where Carrie was. For hours on Monday night, Baker, Carrie's husband Earl, and 10 other lawyers discussed possible charges for Jerry. They didn't want Jerry to respond violently when the agents entered his home. They also knew it was a real possibility that Jerry could harm himself, an officer, or both. The group of lawyers decided to convene a special grand jury at 9 a.m. that Tuesday morning, October 1st. By then, Carrie would have been missing for 3 weeks, 21 days, and 504 hours. Countless minutes and seconds for her devastated family. There was really no hope that she was still alive. So the DA was going to try to indict Jerry Bland for capital murder. But they waited too late to arrest him. On Tuesday, October 1st, 1991, at about 4:30 a.m., the FBI agents watching 50-year-old Jerry Bland's house heard a gunshot. But instead of rushing the house, the officers waited until daylight to enter Jerry's home. When they did, They saw that Jerry had died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had pointed a .30 caliber Winchester rifle at his heart while sitting on the bed in an upstairs bedroom. The bullet exited out of his lower back, hit the bedroom wall, and then slammed into the house next door. Luckily, no one else was harmed. For the record, several newspapers reported that Jerry shot himself in the head, so there were conflicting reports for some reason. Jerry wrote a letter before pulling the trigger. The full contents of that letter have never been released, but we do know a few facts about it. It was addressed to Jerry's lawyer, Michael Shores. It was 2 pages long and handwritten, and there was no mention of Carrie Lawson or any hints about her whereabouts. Instead, Jerry wrote about 2 men in the town of Haleyville. According to Michael Shores, these men in Haleyville were somehow involved in a drug deal that Jerry may have been involved in. In the note, Jerry claimed that the cash in his pickup truck was from that drug deal, which was a lie since the cash in his truck was a portion of the ransom money. The FBI had already confirmed the serial numbers and were sure. This drug deal story by Jerry was never confirmed or resolved in any way. We have no idea what Jerry was talking about. Some suspect that Jerry was trying to cover for an unknown third party who was involved in the kidnapping, but there is no credible or authoritative support for this theory. I have a theory about this that I'll get into later. By the end of it all, approximately 98% of the ransom money was recovered. Jerry had spent about $8,000 on various items around Jasper, including a TV satellite dish. And as you know, there was some money in Karen's house. So where was the rest? Well, following Jerry's death, the authorities searched his house again. This time they found approximately $250,000 in the attic. Law enforcement has suggested that this money wasn't in Jerry's house the first time they searched it, though some doubt that that is true. The FBI was already facing so much backlash for this case that they may have been motivated to mislead the public to mitigate the fallout. But I mean, for real, who was going to sneak into Jerry's house and hide the money while the FBI were watching him? Or right after his death? How would that work? It would actually make the FBI look even worse. And let's talk about the FBI for a moment. As you might imagine, Jerry Bland's death was devastating news to Carrie's family. The one person in the entire world who knew where Carrie was now gone. His suicide was entirely avoidable, ridiculously avoidable. They had his voice on the ransom tapes. They found marijuana in his home. He had over $8,000 of the ransom money in his truck. And they had found multiple guns in his house and knew that the kidnapper had held the Lawsons at gunpoint. Come on. Police and agents did not need an indictment to enter that house. I just gave you a whole list of probable causes for an arrest, or exigent circumstances, or reasonable suspicion. Take your pick of what to call it. Beyond that, if the FBI were worried about federal charges, they could have sent Jasper Police or Walker County in on state charges. And it's not like the FBI didn't know all of this. Carrie's sister Margaret later told AL.com, "I can remember one of the feds saying, 'Look, he had marijuana in the house. Let's just arrest him on a drug charge. Get him in jail.' I remember someone saying he could kill himself." She has also said that even though the FBI was in charge of the investigation, they had been planning to send local Jasper police officers in to arrest Jerry. And she said that the FBI was only watching the front of the house. The back was wide open. I haven't found that anywhere else as a fact, but I also don't believe she was lying about it. Why in the world would she? Someone had to have told her that. But stories have a way of changing over the years, of becoming more exaggerated, especially when we're talking about the colossal failures of something as big as the FBI. By the end of it all, Margaret believed the situation was poorly handled, which, all things considered, was a pretty nice way of saying it. Carrie's sister Margaret also seems to have been drawn into some of the conspiracy theories. She said, "I still don't know why they didn't arrest him. The whole Jerry Bland suicide is very suspicious, and it's very possible somebody else killed him." It's hard to blame her. She and her family were left with so few answers. I personally think it's doubtful that someone else killed Jerry Bland with police watching his house. But I do understand the suspicions. Carrie's father, David Smith, said to the Birmingham Post-Herald, "This is not one of the FBI's better cases, and I'm sure no one knows that better than they do." The FBI rarely speaks about cases to the public, but this time, public perception of their work was so bad that they did comment. FBI representatives claimed that since Jerry had not crossed state lines while kidnapping Carrie, this was not technically a federal crime. The federal agents were, supposedly, waiting to arrest Jerry after the state had charged him. But reports from the Birmingham Post-Herald suggest that the FBI wasn't waiting on anything of the sort. These BPH articles suggest that federal agents thought Jerry was going to exit his house and lead them to Carrie. But obviously, Jerry didn't do that. It should be noted that the BPH articles do not directly quote an FBI representative or agent, even as an unnamed source. But it certainly makes sense. They were just sitting and watching. It's unclear what exactly happened. It probably always will be. However, the criticisms of the FBI's decision-making throughout Carrie's case are incredibly far-reaching. In 1993, Washington Post reporter Ron Kessler wrote a book entitled "The FBI: Inside the World's Most Powerful Law Enforcement Agency." In this book, Kessler claimed that Carrie Lawson's case was one of the agency's biggest failures. The FBI agent in charge of Carrie's case, Alan P. Whitaker, said in direct response to Kessler's book, "It's obvious we're not happy with the result of the kidnapping investigation. Do I think it was one of the agency's biggest failures? No, I don't. But it wasn't one of our shining successes." But Agent Whitaker retired in May of 1993, just 8 months after Jerry Bland's death by suicide in October of '92. Before retiring, Agent Whitaker had served 28 years with the Bureau. And Kessler wrote in his book that it's likely FBI Director William Baker pushed Whitaker into retirement due in part to the mishandling of Carrie's case. Agent Whitaker denied those claims in interviews with the Birmingham Post-Herald. He said he retired for unrelated reasons. Earl Lawson seemed to be the only one who really defended the FBI. He told AL.com that, for sure, mistakes were made, but, quote, "Those guys gave 200% every day, every minute. They cried with us. If mistakes were made, it wasn't because of a lack of effort. They cared and tried their very hardest. It was personal to them." No, Carrie's husband directed his ire at Jerry Bland. He said, "I couldn't help but think that anybody would tell or leave a note about where she was. The fact that Bland killed himself without doing anything is incomprehensible to me." Following Bland's death, the search for Carrie Lawson was renewed. Law enforcement and volunteers focused on locations where Jerry was familiar and had worked, especially places related to the coal mining business, since coal mining had basically always been Jerry Bland's career. They also scoured the areas near various payphones that Jerry and Carrie had used. In the end, nothing was discovered that led to the recovery of Carrie's body. But it wasn't for lack of trying. Searchers used horses, pickup trucks, and ATVs to sweep miles and miles of land. Divers combed through rivers. People walked through overgrown, snake-filled rural areas of Alabama. The University of Alabama ROTC and the National Guard joined the search in early October. For about 6 weeks, thousands of people tried to find Carrie. According to those present, multiple bodies were discovered in the search process. The names of those poor souls were never released in the sources we found. But the searchers never found Carrie. Her whereabouts or her remains were etched into the top of everyone's minds, especially her family's. Her mother, Harriet Smith, said to the Birmingham Post-Herald, "There's not a single minute when we are not thinking about this situation." She also told the BPH that when her other daughter, Margaret, got married a year after Carrie was abducted, she couldn't help but look for her daughter's face and the bridesmaids as they walked down the aisle. "I knew better," she said. "But these things cross your mind. That's why this thing needs closure, because we can't stop. We can't quit until we know." I don't think anyone can understand the deep sorrow and never-ending ache felt by parents who cannot lay their children to rest, except for other parents who have lived through this horror. By October 22, 1991, the search for Carrie had officially ended. The FBI was closing the investigation, but over the years, there were additional targeted searches. In early November of 91, about 50 people conducted a shoulder-to-shoulder search in the Deer Lick Creek area of Tuscaloosa County. They wanted to ensure the Mitchell-Neely mines were clear. Jerry knew these mines, had traveled to them before for business, and had been near there during some of the phone calls he made while he was holding Carrie. That is an incredible lead, which led to heartbreaking frustration when searchers found nothing. Then, 5 years later, in 1996, a construction crew emptied a pool at a different closed surface mine in Tuscaloosa County. They used an excavator to rip up the bottom of the pool, but searchers were again disappointed. As if Carrie's family did not have enough to endure, in March of 1992, a man named Perry Jerome Black pled guilty in federal court for extorting Carrie's family. Perry, who lived in northern Alabama, had called and sent letters to Carrie's husband and her parents. He claimed that he had information about where Carrie was, but he demanded money to tell them that information. Perry was sentenced to 70 months in prison and 3 years of probation, so he got almost 6 years. This was only one of several extortion attempts the Lawson and Smith families were forced to navigate. Details of these other attempts were not provided in the papers, but Margaret, Carrie's sister, also confirmed there were several attempts and that it was agonizing for her parents. 8 months after Carrie was kidnapped, her husband Earl moved away from Jasper. Earl said that it was difficult to try and live a normal life when every person in town always wanted to talk about Carrie's abduction. He remarried and had 3 children. By his own admission, Earl doesn't talk about Carrie's case often, but he will always remember how kind people were to him and Carrie's family throughout the ordeal. He recalled to AL.com how many people who didn't know Carrie or the Lawsons or the Smiths at all still took the time to help look for her. Unfortunately, there are other people who still whisper that Earl had something to do with his young wife's kidnapping. They whispered it at the time and even more when he moved away from Jasper and remarried. I can't imagine living that way. I completely understand why he moved. It doesn't mean he didn't love her. Like everyone else, he believed she was dead, and he needed to be able to get up and go to work every day without being consumed by this tragedy. He had to try and move on with his life. That's not a crime. He tries not to think about it, but told a reporter that the continued rumors have always hurt him. Of course it bothered me, he said. It still bothers me, and it bothers me that my kids have to read stuff like that. I have already mentioned some of the comments of Carrie's sister, Margaret Smith Kubison. Some were made to a podcaster. That show has since pod-faded, not putting out any episodes since 2020. But the host said some concerning things on her show, including calling Carrie's husband Earl Shady McShaderson, which I think is very problematic. But to be fair, Margaret herself refused to outright say her ex-brother-in-law was not involved in Carrie's abduction. She said no comment when asked, but she did allude to suspicious things about Earl's law firm. David Smith, Carrie's father, also hinted around about this conspiracy, though he never outright accused the Lawsons or the firm Earl worked for. There has never been any proof that Earl Lawson had anything to do with his wife's abduction, and I honestly think we need to let that particular conspiracy theory die. I mean, really, what would his motive be? Margaret said that Carrie had a life insurance policy, but that their father David was the beneficiary, and he wound up putting all of that money into private investigators and other resources trying to find his daughter. Earl Lawson Jr. came from a rich family. He had a great career at a prosperous law firm. For that matter, why would his firm be involved in this, as has also been hinted at? I understand the pain of Carrie's family and their need to cling to certain theories, but I think the whispers about Earl are very unfair and hurtful, and I want to make sure that's clear on this show. I should also briefly discuss that there's a lot of stuff on the internet about corruption in Walker County and nefarious goings-on. You can even find Reddit threads about the county, and I told you the urban myth about Walker County being the place to find a hitman. Frankly, most of this stuff comes from the comments section, and we all know how reliable those can be. But Carrie's case is mentioned a lot in these forums. Even though the FBI was far from perfect in this case, it's ridiculous to believe they actually conspired with local authorities to cover up the truth about Carrie's abduction. Everyone wanted to bring Carrie Lawson home. Her sister Margaret even went out of her way to praise the Jasper Police Department, even though she was rightly critical of the FBI. 2 years after the abduction, in September of '93, Carrie Smith Lawson was officially declared dead. Her grave is in the St. Luke's Episcopal Church Cemetery in Cleveland, Tennessee. Her father was buried in the same location when he passed away at the age of 83 in 2017. Her mother, Harriet, passed away at the age of 72 in 2008. Margaret told AL.com how not finding Carrie, quote, devastated my parents. I honestly believe the trauma exacerbated my mother's Alzheimer's, and it certainly broke all of our hearts. Margaret also said that her father had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars attempting to find Carrie. She said it was hurtful that her father had to worry about money in his final years after putting almost everything he had into trying to find his lost daughter. She made it clear that he was not destitute, but he certainly didn't enjoy the kind of retirement he deserved. For more than a decade, Carrie's family hired more than 7 private investigators to look for her. One in particular, named Woodrow Wilson Self, who went by Red, became very close with the Smith family. He was a former Birmingham police officer and district attorney's office investigator. Red continued searching for Carrie until the day he died at the age of 91 in 2009. Using information that Red found, Carrie's family tried to get the FBI to reopen the case in the year 2000. They were unsuccessful. However, in 2002, a tip led the authorities to look near a Tuscaloosa County community called Samantha. Crews used a backhoe to look for Carrie's remains. But still, she was never found. Although Jerry Bland is dead and gone, perhaps slamming shut the door of ever finding Carrie's remains, there is one person that family, friends, and the community can focus on. Back in November of 1991, 30-year-old Karen Lancaster McPherson, Jerry's cousin, and the fake nurse pled guilty to first-degree kidnapping. In doing so, Karen avoided the possibility of facing the death penalty for capital murder. Instead, she received life in prison with the possibility of parole. But the presiding judge, James C. Brotherton, explicitly stated that he did not want Karen to ever receive parole. He said, "The court permanently objects to it." District Attorney Charles Baker told reporters that the judge's statement reflected the community's feelings. Baker basically said that when Jerry died, everyone redirected their anger at Karen. Karen's family would later say this was unfair. Karen was not the mastermind of the kidnapping plot. Jerry was. Karen's defense attorney stated that nobody questions she didn't want to harm anybody. But Carrie's family believed, and still believes, that Karen should take responsibility for her actions. Karen spent hours with Carrie without Jerry. What was stopping her from helping Carrie escape? If Karen was truly blackmailed into kidnapping Carrie, as her family has suggested, she could have gone to the authorities after Jerry let her leave and he took back control of Carrie. Instead, Karen took whatever her cut of the ransom money was, and she kept quiet. This amount was not disclosed, but based on quick math, it was likely around $40,000. I'm just thinking that Jerry had about $260,000 accounted for in his home, truck, and what we know he had already spent. But this is just a guess. Within a year after Carrie's abduction, her family made a legal agreement with Karen. If she would provide 100% of the information she knew about Carrie, the Smiths and the Lawsons would not oppose her parole after she served 10 years in prison. Per the agreement, Karen had to take a polygraph test, undergo hypnosis, and be analyzed by a voice expert to determine if she was lying. Karen agreed and met with Carrie's father, David, to tell him all she knew. David Smith expressed to AL.com how difficult the 4.5-hour-long meeting was for him. He said, "I had to just sit there and listen to her. I couldn't grab her and choke her or anything like that." Ultimately, this was all for naught. A voice analyst listened to an audio of the meeting and believed Karen was lying. That same night, Karen's lawyers called the Smiths and Lawsons. She wanted to recant everything Karen had said. Nothing, she told David, was true. Since Karen's initial incarceration in 1991, she has tried to withdraw her guilty plea and seek a retrial. She has been denied. Karen has sought parole 4 times. She has been denied all 4 times. One or more members of Carrie's family have been present at every parole hearing. As of 2016, Earl Lawson Jr. has not yet attended any of the hearings, but he did write letters to the court opposing Karen's release. Earl said to AL.com, "She could have released her. She could have done a million different things, and she chose not to. I don't know how a human being does that." Today, Karen is about 63 years old. She continues to serve her life sentence in a Birmingham prison. Per the Alabama Department of Corrections, she has served almost 33 years so far. Her last bid for parole was denied in 2022, and her next parole hearing is March 1st of 2027. In 2016, her brother Frank Lancaster told AL.com, "I don't disagree that my sister deserved to be punished. 25 years of her life are gone. The man who killed Carrie himself is dead. My sister had a minor role in this. I know my sister, and if she had any inclination that there was going to be harm done to Carrie, she wouldn't have done this." He went on, "What more can she give? They've had their eye for an eye, their pound of flesh. This is no longer about justice. It's about vengeance." I have to admit, that's a powerful argument. I couldn't find any petitions opposing Karen's release online, or for that matter, supporting her release. But I'm sure if you wanted to set a reminder to write a letter to the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles, Carrie or Karen's family would appreciate it, if that's how you feel. I feel conflicted about Karen. She certainly deserved prison time for her actions. If you are involved in a felony conspiracy, you are charged with murder right along with the actual killer. So it's not like her sentence is all that unusual. Margaret, who is a lawyer herself, points that out. The difference here is parole. Everyone but Karen's family opposes her release. Beyond her own actions, which are indeed very murky, lying to a grieving father's face is cold-blooded. I can see why Carrie's family wants to just throw away the key. I would too if this was my sister. But after 33 years, I really believe that if Karen did know where Carrie's body was, she would have told the truth by now. She's already in prison for life and can't be tried for capital murder because of her plea deal. Maybe she was more complicit in Carrie's murder and just can't admit it to herself or anyone else. And we only have her word and the note of a dead murderer to pin her innocence on. I also can't help but put it in perspective with the last case I covered, the murder of Charlotte Childs. That killer admitted to viciously beating his ex-girlfriend to death, and after 27 years, he is a free man. I hated that deal, even though I understood and respected the family's decision. If Karen McPherson had told the truth and tried to bring Carrie home so her family could lay her to rest, she also would be walking free today. She would have left prison at 40 years old with plenty of life left to live ahead of her. That was Carrie's family's decision. But Karen lied and recanted. She had her chance to do the right thing. So we can never know what really happened. If Karen does know anything about what happened to Carrie, she's obviously taken it to her grave. Many, including some of Carrie's close family, believe that Carrie's remains are buried in a coal mine somewhere. Some also believe that there were more people involved in the kidnapping than just Jerry and Karen. Why did Jerry refer to they when talking about who was holding Carrie? Why did he write about two unknown men in his suicide note? In 1992, Carrie's father, David, told the Birmingham Post-Herald, "There's more people involved. There's some stuff I can't talk about now, but one day it's going to come out." However, to date, nothing has ever come out, and any rumors of additional suspects have not been verified by authorities. In short, based on the evidence available to the public, it appears that only Jerry and Karen were at fault. Maybe the Smith family or their private investigators know something we don't. I just feel like something would have come out by now. And I know Occam's razor is a trope, but it is a useful one. The simplest explanation is that Jerry Bland needed money. He was born and raised in Jasper and knew the prominent Lawson family had money. He had also worked in coal mines his entire adult life. He knew where strip mines were all over Walker County and surrounding areas. I bet a guy like that knew a lot of places to hide a body. And maybe he never meant for Carrie to die. Frankly, everything about the ransom that could go wrong did go wrong. It wasn't an easy one-night deal like he had planned. He spent time with her, having to take her to payphones and hold her until he got the money, and she had seen his face. We don't know everything that was in his suicide note, except that it would seem he didn't want Karen blamed. And if anything, I believe shame was a big factor for the rest of it. It was easier to blame it on random drug dealers than admit to what he did to Carrie. I think that's why he didn't tell where he hid her body. I think if police released the entire contents of Bland's suicide note, the public might be able to see the ramblings of an ashamed, guilty man. Or maybe they could decide for themselves if any of the rumors are true. At this point, why hold it back? If anything, things like this are why folks whisper about corruption in Walker County. There's a lack of transparency here that fuels the ongoing suspicions that Margaret and others still have. That is my theory that I mentioned about the possibility of a third party or more being involved in Carrie's abduction and getting away with it. I don't believe there is a third party. I think the third party here is the guilt and shame of Jerry Bland. And so now, regardless of any conspiracy theories, the actual search for Carrie continues. If you have any information that could lead to Carrie's whereabouts, contact the Birmingham FBI office or head to tips.fbi.gov. As of 2016, Carrie's family continued to offer a $100,000 reward for any information leading to Carrie. I'm not sure if the reward is still active in 2024, but reward or not, if you know something, say something. Do the right thing. People in this case refused to do the right thing, and a family suffered greatly for it. Carrie's alma mater, Cleveland High School, has a Carrie Smith Lawson Scholarship Fund. The members of her 1984 graduating class put this together to award a female senior $2,000. The winner of this scholarship must demonstrate the same positive traits that Carrie embodied: sterling character, a determination to excel, and a caring disposition. It's been 33 years. Carrie's parents grieved for her for the rest of their lives. Her sister Margaret continues to miss Carrie every day, but she does stress that life must go on. She must continue to get out of bed every day and try to put Carrie out of her mind as she takes care of her children and goes to work and church and just lives her life. She has to. She told AL.com in 2016, "What has been taken from me personally is immeasurable. I have 4 sisters-in-law, and I'm close with them, but missing a sister is so difficult. That is the only person who shares your story. You lose your future, and also your connection to the past." It was difficult for me to even read that quote. I have a sister. She's my only sibling. I cannot even imagine Margaret's grief. I have a lot of admiration for Margaret. It's hard to get up every day and go on with your life after such a tragedy, especially one with no real closure. But she is strong, and I love how she chooses to remember her sister as just a regular human being. She said, "Her legacy is kindness and how you make an impact on people just by being thoughtful. She wasn't a spectacular student. She wasn't a beauty queen. She wasn't someone who leaves their mark by being famous. But everyone that knew her felt like they were loved by her, and that was extraordinary." Southern Fried True Crime is hosted and produced by me, Erica Kelley. Today's episode was researched by me and Andrea Marshbank. As usual, any editorial comments and opinions are my own. Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio, and the original graphic artist by Coley Horner. Today's episode was edited and mixed by Brandon Schexnayder of Southern Gothic and Erica Kelley. Thank you to listeners Nocturnal Druid, Reagan Williams, and Amanda for suggesting Carrie's case. I honestly was surprised it isn't more famous. Carrie's story needed to be told. If you have any suggestions, please go to my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com, and click on the listener suggestion tab, or email sftcresearch@gmail.com. This is the best way for me to get those little-known cases y'all always send me. Please remember that I do not accept suggestions on social media private messages. But please come join our Facebook group, Southern Fried True Crime Fans Discussion Group, where we swap recipes, worship Dolly Parton, and share memes. We do, of course, discuss true crime, not just Southern Fried, but all kinds. But it is still very much a Southern lifestyle group. Our group is a safe and fun corner of Facebook, and by God, we mean it when we say no shit asses allowed. It's not just a motto, it's how we run the group. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, and please tell a friend or rate and review. I'm on all large platforms like iTunes, iHeart, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, and YouTube. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.